All right. Diving in and knowing your philosophical leanings, I think we should tackle something pretty fundamental here.
Yeah, definitely.
Going deep on how we understand and make judgments uh, about the world around us.
I think that'll resonate with you, yeah.
Yeah, and so specifically, we're going to be tackling Immanuel Kant's critique of judgment.
Okay.
Big work.
It is.
But we're going to really focus in on his ideas on aesthetics and teleology.
Right.
So beauty and purpose.
Yeah. And especially purpose kind of in the natural order.
Yeah, using primarily the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on this.
Excellent resource.
So just kind of as a background,
Here.
the critique of judgment, as you probably know, is the third critique in Kant's critical project.
Yeah, the big three.
Right alongside the first critique, the critique of pure reason.
Limits of metaphysics knowledge.
Exactly. And then the second one, the critique of practical reason, which is about ethics.
That's right.
And this third one, the critique of judgment, is kind of broken down into two main parts. The critique of aesthetic judgment
Okay.
and the critique of teleological judgment.
Makes sense.
And there's an introduction that kind of frames all this and how it fits in with the rest of his project.
Right.
So I think one of the first things that might jump out to someone with your background is,
Sure.
you've got beauty over here, you've got purpose over here.
Seem very disparate. Yeah.
How do these fit together, and really, what does that tell us about this faculty of judgment that seems to be kind of at the center of all this?
That's the question.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that's worth noting is,
Yeah.
this third critique, while it's not as maybe popular as the first two critiques,
Right.
it has really gotten a lot of attention in recent decades from scholars,
Yeah. This has been a resurgence.
which really, I think, speaks to the lasting power of some of the ideas in there.
It's very relevant for a lot of contemporary issues.
So, okay, let's start with that bedrock then. This faculty of judgment.
Right.
What is it, and why is it getting so much attention here in this third critique?
So Kant defines this Urteilskraft, the
Right.
faculty of judgment, as the capacity for thinking the particular under the universal.
Okay.
And if you think back to the critique of pure reason, judgment there is mostly thought of as taking a particular thing
Yeah.
and putting it under a pre-existing rule.
Okay, so like this is a tree because it fits our concept of tree.
Exactly. This is an oak tree because it fits our concept of oak.
Okay,
So applying categories.
gotcha.
But in the critique of judgment, Kant kind of elevates judgment to a faculty in its own right and gives it its own a priori principle.
Okay,
So it needs its own critique to figure out what it can do.
gotcha.
And he breaks it down into two main types of judging. One is determining judgment, which is kind of what we were just talking about,
Mm-hmm.
taking a particular and putting it under a universal.
Yeah, like we did in the first critique, basically.
Yeah, under the guidance of the understanding.
Yeah, okay, so that's kind of our framework. What's the second one?
The second one, and this is kind of the more interesting one for the critique of judgment, is reflecting judgment.
Okay,
And here, the situation is reversed.
okay,
You're given a particular judgment,
yeah.
and you have to find the universal for it.
Oh, interesting.
You don't have the rule beforehand, you're looking for it.
I see.
And this reflective capacity is really important for both aesthetic judgments and for teleological judgments,
Okay.
and especially for judgments of beauty, especially about nature.
Oh, okay, so like if I see a beautiful vista,
Right.
I don't have a concept of beautiful vista number 37.
Exactly.
I have to kind of reflect on that experience.
Yeah, you have to search for what universal applies to it.
Okay.
And so this focus on reflective judgment is really what makes the third critique its own thing.
Okay.
Historically, people have kind of wondered whether the critique of judgment really is a unified thing.
Right. Aesthetics and teleology seem very different.
Yeah, they really belong together.
Yeah.
But more and more people are seeing it as a unified whole. And this idea of reflective judgment is what unifies it.
Okay, so this is kind of the bridge.
Yeah, the mind searching for order and meaning
Eh,
when there's no pre-given rule.
I like that.
Yeah, and some scholars like Beatrice Longness have even found connections back to Kant's logic,
Oh, wow.
where he talks about the capacity to judge.
Okay.
And they say that that capacity is fully realized in the critique of judgment through this reflective function.
Interesting.
So it's all about how we process information and form concepts through comparison, reflection, and abstraction.
Okay, so it's really about those fundamental building blocks of thought.
Yeah.
And there's even the idea that maybe our very ability to make cognitive judgments
Yeah.
might actually depend on aesthetic experience.
Right. So maybe aesthetic experience is a condition for the possibility of cognitive judgment.
Interesting.
That's something that people like Bell and Ginsburg and Macriel have argued.
Okay, so it's not just that they're connected. They might actually be that one is necessary for the other?
Yeah, or at least very closely linked.
Okay.
Some other people, like Mackay, say no, they're parallel, but they're both based on this underlying reflecting judgment.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's another way to look at it.
So, I mean, this is already really justifying this deep dive. Like,
Mhm.
reflective judgment really seems to be at the center of connecting all these different parts of Kant.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get into that first part then, aesthetics.
Okay.
So, what are judgments of beauty according to Kant?
So broadly, a judgment of taste or an aesthetic judgment is one that's grounded in feeling,
Okay.
and specifically the feeling of pleasure or displeasure.
Right.
He identifies three types: judgments of the agreeable, judgments of beauty, and judgments of the sublime.
Okay.
But the critique of aesthetic judgment is mainly focused on judgments of beauty and the sublime, and mostly judgments of beauty or taste.
Okay.
So that's what we'll focus on.
Gotcha. So the analytic of the beautiful is really trying to figure out what makes a judgment of beauty a judgment of beauty.
Exactly. Yeah, what sets it apart?
Okay, so what are the big pieces of that?
So he breaks it down into 4 moments.
4.
Yeah. Quality, quantity, relation, and modality.
Okay, let's take those one at a time.
Okay, so the first one, quality Kant,
Mhm.
says judgments of beauty involve disinterested pleasure.
Okay, so disinterested, what does that mean?
So that means that the pleasure that you get from something beautiful
Mm-hmm.
is independent of its actual existence
Hmm.
and any interest you might have in it.
So it doesn't matter if I own it or not?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if it's useful to you or not.
Okay.
So you can contrast this with the agreeable.
Okay.
So like enjoying a good meal.
Okay. Oh.
The pleasure there is tied to satisfying your desire.
Right. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I'm not hungry anymore.
Exactly. And the good is about what we ought to like based on reason.
Okay.
Beauty is about appreciating the object itself.
Okay, for itself.
Exactly.
So that's the foundation.
Yeah.
What about the second moment, quantity?
So the second moment is about the universality of judgments of beauty. So when we say something is beautiful, we're saying that everyone ought to find it beautiful.
Hmm.
Not just that we like it, but that anyone should if they were perceiving it in the same way.
Okay.
And Kant is very insistent that this universality is not based on concepts.
So it's not like I can look at something and
Right.
say, oh, it fits this definition of beauty, therefore it is beautiful.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
not like that.
Gotcha.
He even says beauty is not a concept of the object.
Mm.
And this is really different from cognitive judgments and moral judgments.
Right. Those are based on concept.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is totally different.
Yeah, it's a different kind of universality.
Interesting. And he does talk about this idea of an indeterminate concept.
Yeah, later on in the Antinomy of Taste.
Right. So maybe there's something there.
Yeah, it's something that people are still debating.
Okay, so it's a universality that we feel is true,
Yeah.
even if we can't necessarily say exactly why.
Right, it's not a logical proof or anything.
Okay, and that's a big shift from our normal ideas of objective truth.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so third moment, relation.
Okay, so this is where Kant introduces the idea of purposiveness without a purpose.
Purpose without a purpose. Okay.
Yeah, so unlike judgments of the good, which are about a purpose or a function, judgments of beauty don't depend on an external purpose.
Hmm.
But we still perceive a kind of purposiveness in the object
Okay.
and in how our minds are working when we perceive it.
So like if I'm looking at a snowflake
Right.
and I see the intricate patterns,
Yeah.
I appreciate those, not because they do something,
Exactly.
but just because they are what they are.
Yeah, because of the form.
Okay, so there's a purpose there,
Yeah, a formal purpose.
but it's not actually doing anything.
Right. And this is a big part of how we perceive order and meaning in nature.
Okay, so this is starting to connect to teleology a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
Okay, so purposiveness without a purpose. That seems to be the essence of Kant's formalism in aesthetics.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
the pleasure comes from the form itself
Right.
and how our minds are working together.
Not because of anything external.
Right.
Okay, and this is also something that people debate about, right?
Yeah, there's debate about how formal Kant really is.
Right, because it brings up questions about content.
Yeah, and meaning.
Okay, so finally, the fourth moment, modality.
So modality is about the necessity that we associate with judgments of beauty.
Okay, so not logical necessity.
Not logical or objective, no.
Okay,
It's what he calls normative necessity.
okay. I'm going to need you to unpack that one.
So basically, when we experience something as beautiful, we feel like our pleasure is connected to the object.
Okay.
And our judgment is kind of an example for others.
Like everyone should feel this.
Yeah, they ought to.
Okay.
And this is based on what Kant calls common sense, or sensus communis,
Okay.
which is the subjective principle of judging by feeling.
Okay. So it's subjective,
Right.
but it's still something that we all share.
Yeah, it's a shared human capacity.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not that everyone will agree,
Right.
but that they should agree.
Exactly. Based on this shared capacity.
Gotcha. Okay. So now we get to that central question.
Yeah.
How can something be based on feeling and also claim to be universally true?
That's a big one.
Like, how does that work?
Yeah, and this is what Kant is trying to figure out in the deduction of taste.
Okay, so this is the justification.
Yeah, he's trying to make sense of this apparent paradox.
All right, so what does he say?
So his answer is based on this idea of the free play of imagination and understanding.
Okay, free play.
Yeah. So in normal cognition,
Yeah.
our imagination and understanding work together under the guidance of concepts.
Okay, so imagination is taking in the senses.
Right.
Understanding is applying concepts.
Exactly.
Okay.
But in aesthetic experience,
Yeah.
Kant says they work together differently.
Oh.
They're in free harmony, not constrained by a specific concept.
So it's kind of like they're just vibing together.
Yeah, exactly. And this free play is what produces the disinterested pleasure.
Okay, so it's not about the concept.
Right.
It's about this interaction.
Yeah, the harmonious interplay.
Interesting.
And Kant's big argument is that this free play is actually a manifestation of the conditions that make all cognition possible.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So because of this connection to our cognitive faculties,
Yeah.
he thinks we can demand universal agreement in the feeling of pleasure.
So because everyone has these faculties,
Right.
they should all be able to experience this.
Exactly.
Okay, I see the logic there. But, as we said before,
Yeah.
there are some issues with this argument.
Definitely.
What are some of the main criticisms?
So the main problem is this.
Yeah.
Either this free play is part of all experience,
Okay.
or it's not.
Right.
If it is part of all experience,
Yeah.
then why isn't everything beautiful?
Right. That's kind of a weird conclusion.
Yeah, it seems absurd.
Yeah.
But if it's not part of all experience,
Yeah.
then how can we demand universal agreement?
Right, because it's like some special thing.
Exactly.
Why would everyone have it?
Yeah, if it's separate from normal cognition, why would everyone experience it?
Yeah, that's a really big hurdle.
Yeah, it's a serious problem.
Like a genuine issue
Yeah.
with his logic.
People have tried to fix it
Okay.
using other parts of Kant's philosophy,
Like what?
like his ideas about morality,
Okay.
or aesthetic
Yeah.
ideas, or common sense.
But those aren't really central to the argument here.
No, not to the deduction itself.
Right.
And then there's also the question of the timing of pleasure and judgment.
Oh, yeah. What comes first?
Yeah. So Kant seems to say different things about this.
Really?
Yeah, especially in section 9.
Okay.
He suggests that judging comes before and causes the pleasure.
Interesting.
But that's not totally clear.
So there's debate about that.
Yeah, exactly.
So this free play concept is really central,
Yeah,
but also really hard to understand.
it is. Yeah, he uses a lot of metaphors.
Yeah.
And different people have different interpretations.
Like who?
Like Ginsburg, Zinkin, Gorodetsky, Williams.
Okay.
They all have slightly different takes on it.
And is it a psychological process or something more fundamental?
That's another debate.
Right.
Is it just how our minds work, or is it a transcendental condition?
Okay. So lots to think about there.
Yeah, lots of different interpretations.
And what about this idea of aesthetic ideas?
Right.
How do those fit in?
So those are kind of these representations of the imagination
Okay.
that make us think a lot,
Yeah.
but we don't have a concept for them. And they're really important for Kant's theory of art,
Okay.
but they also play a role in this free play idea.
So it's all connected.
Yeah, it's all part of the same system.
Okay. That's a lot on aesthetics.
It is.
Let's move on to the second part.
Okay.
Teleology.
So this is about purposes in the natural world.
Right.
And Kant has two main points here.
Okay.
One is that we have to think of organisms as natural purposes.
Natural purposes.
Yeah,
Okay, so like they have a purpose built in.
exactly. And two, he wants to make this idea of purpose fit with a mechanistic view of nature.
Okay, so how does he define purpose?
So he defines purpose, Zweck,
Okay.
and purposiveness, Zweckmäßigkeit, in section 10.
Okay.
A purpose is the object of a concept.
Oh.
That's also the cause of the object. And purposiveness is the causality of a concept in relation to its object.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a bit dense.
And also his language isn't always consistent, right?
Yeah, purposiveness can also just mean the quality that makes us see something as a purpose.
So it's a little slippery?
It can be. Yeah.
Okay, and then he breaks purposiveness down even further, right?
Yeah, so there's subjective and objective purposiveness,
Okay.
and then those are divided into formal and material or real purposiveness.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, it gets complicated.
So remind me, what are the important ones for this?
So for us, the important ones are subjective formal purposiveness,
Okay.
which is about aesthetics and how we see nature as comprehensible,
Okay.
and then objective material purposiveness, which is about organisms and means-ends relationships.
Okay.
And there's debate about whether Kant really has one concept of purposiveness here.
Like, are they all the same kind of thing?
Yeah, Geyer says no, there are two different senses.
Okay.
But Ginsburg and Zuckert say yes, there's one concept,
Okay.
based on the lawfulness of the contingent.
So different interpretations again.
Yeah, as always.
All right, so what about this idea that nature is purposive for our cognitive faculties?
Right. So Kant says that it's an a priori principle of reflecting judgment,
Okay.
that nature is purposive for our cognitive faculties or purposive for judgment.
Okay, so nature has a purpose.
Not exactly.
Oh.
This is a regulative principle, not a constitutive one.
Okay, there's that distinction again.
Yeah, so we're not saying that nature actually has a purpose objectively,
Okay.
but we have to assume that it does for our judgment to work.
Especially when we're doing science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we're trying to understand the world empirically.
And forming concepts.
Right.
Okay, so it's like a necessary assumption.
Yeah, a presupposition that makes science possible.
Interesting.
Some people even think this is Kant's answer to Hume's problem of induction,
Oh, wow.
how we can generalize from experience.
Okay, so really big implications.
Yeah, potentially.
Okay, so how does this lead to organisms being natural purposes?
So Kant says that organisms are special
Okay.
because in organisms, the whole determines the parts.
Okay.
And they have this self-organizing capacity.
So like a tree,
Right,
the whole tree kind of determines how the branches grow.
exactly.
And the branches in turn help the tree survive.
Right, it's this reciprocal relationship.
Okay.
And this is hard to explain with just mechanistic causes.
Right, because normally we think about the parts coming together.
Yeah, to make the whole.
Okay, so this is different.
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking about causation. And this is where he's engaging with the biology of his time.
Right, so people were thinking about the origin of species and stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And so this tension between mechanism and teleology leads to what Kant calls the antinomy of judgment.
Okay, the antinomy.
Yeah, so we have to explain things mechanistically.
Yeah.
But organisms seem to have purposes.
Right.
So how do we reconcile those?
Yeah, what does he say?
So Kant says that both principles are regulative.
Regulative.
Yeah, meaning they reflect the limits of our understanding.
Okay.
He says that our understanding is discursive,
Discursive.
meaning we go from concepts to particulars.
Okay.
But maybe there's a kind of intuitive understanding that could grasp everything at once.
So like God.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
But for us,
Yeah.
we need teleological concepts to understand organisms.
Even if they could be explained mechanistically, ultimately.
Right.
Okay, so we're kind of limited in how we can think.
Yeah. We have to use these concepts even if they're not the ultimate truth. And he calls this the subordination of mechanism to teleology.
Oh, okay, subordination.
Yeah, so we should try to explain things mechanistically as much as we can.
Yeah.
But in the end, we need teleological concepts.
Okay, so it's like a hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly.
Mechanism is good, but teleology is higher.
Yeah, it's more fundamental for understanding organisms.
Okay. And this relates to those biological debates too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like epigenesis.
Right.
And he's not just talking about individual organisms, right?
No, he also talks about nature as a system of purposes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he sees all these connections in nature
Yeah.
where things benefit each other.
Okay.
And some of those can be explained mechanistically.
Right.
But he also introduces this idea of outer or relative purposiveness.
Okay, outer purposiveness.
Yeah, so that's when one thing in nature helps another thing that has a purpose.
So like a plant
Right.
that provides food for an animal.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he sees this as pointing towards a bigger idea of nature as a whole being purposeful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, with an ultimate purpose within nature
Okay.
and a final purpose that goes beyond nature.
Okay, final purpose.
Yeah, and this final purpose is us.
Us humans.
Yeah, humans as moral beings. He sees us as the end goal of nature
Wow, okay.
and the development of our moral capacity, what he calls culture.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate purpose of nature.
Okay, so it's all building up to us.
Yeah, in a way.
And it also connects to religion, right?
Yeah, he critiques the idea of proving God's existence from design alone.
So like looking at nature and saying, oh, it's so complex, it must have a designer.
Exactly. He says that can't prove that the designer is morally perfect.
Gotcha.
He thinks we need moral teleology to do that.
Okay, so it's not enough to just look at the design.
Right. We have to think about our purpose as moral beings.
And that leads to God.
Yeah, that's his argument.
Okay, so this is a really big system.
It is, yeah, very complex system.
And bringing it back to the beginning,
Yeah.
how does Kant see his aesthetic theory as being important for philosophy?
So he sees it as really important for understanding judgment as a whole.
Okay.
He thinks it shows how we connect the senses and the intellect,
Yeah.
and how we make sense of the world in ways that go beyond just logic and morality.
Interesting.
And this has implications for science,
Okay.
especially biology.
Because there's purpose there.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
And the connection between aesthetics and ethics is also really important.
Yeah, I mean, that seems really strong.
Yeah, a lot of people have talked about that.
His ideas have been really influential too, right?
Oh, yeah, hugely influential.
Like on other philosophers.
Yeah, definitely.
So give me some examples.
So Cavell connects Kant to ordinary language philosophy,
Okay.
and Bell connects him to Wittgenstein.
Interesting.
And Arendt used his ideas in political philosophy.
Okay.
And Breitenbach even applies them to math and science.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So really wide-ranging.
Yeah, incredibly influential.
So to kind of wrap all this up,
Yeah.
we've really gone deep on Kant's critique of judgment,
We have.
and we've seen how closely he connects aesthetic judgment and teleological judgment.
Right, through reflective judgment.
Exactly. And we've seen how he describes judgments of beauty.
Yeah, their disinterested nature, their universality.
Right. And how he tries to justify that universality.
Yeah, the deduction.
Right. And then we looked at his theory of teleology.
Organisms as natural purposes.
Exactly. And how he tries to fit that in with mechanism.
Yeah, the subordination thesis.
Right. And then all of that leading up to morality and our place in the cosmos.
It's all connected.
And so we started with this question of unity.
Yeah.
Like, does this book actually hold together?
Right. Do aesthetics and teleology belong together?
And it seems like Kant gives us a pretty good answer.
Yeah, he gives us a framework for understanding how we experience the world.
Right, through this faculty of judgment.
Yeah, it's all about judgment.
So for you listening out there,
Yeah.
thinking about all this,
Yeah.
how do you think aesthetic experience plays into philosophical insight?
That's a good question.
Yeah, like does that free play of the mind
Right.
that Kant talks about,
Yep.
is that a model for philosophical thinking?
Interesting.
Or maybe even necessary for it?
That's something to think about?
Yeah, something to ponder.
Definitely.
Kant gives us a lot to chew on,
He does, yeah.
and his ideas are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
I hope you found it illuminating,
Me too.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.